Good afternoon, and welcome to the second conversation of our four-part virtual summer series. As we look forward to our upcoming season in the fall, it's exciting to expand our 9-month signature series that has served as a platform for extraordinary speakers over the last 46 years into a new stage this summer. My name is Allison Millington, and I'm the Vice President of Penske Entertainment, the owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I'm also very honored to serve as the immediate past president of the Economic Club of Indiana, and I have so enjoyed my last year as president, having the opportunity to host impactful conversations with some of our country's top thinkers. With our new virtual summer series, the Economic Club continues its mission by bringing timely and engaging leadership perspectives from various industries and sectors on the economic and social impacts of our current events. We launched our virtual session last week, and we were joined by Beth Bechtel and Ambassador Kip Tom of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, who discussed the global food supply and addressed the importance of the health of Indiana agriculture and why it is important on the global stage. You can watch their discussion again online at economicclub.com. Before introducing today's guests, I'd also like to take a moment and thank our presenting sponsor, the Lumina Foundation, and our outstanding group of platinum sponsors that sponsor the Economic Club. Thank you so much to each of them. We want you to be part of the conversation today. We'll hear remarks from today's guests and then open up the chat feature, which will allow you to be part of this important dialogue today. Questions can also be shared via Twitter at Economic Club In, or using the hashtag EconLunch. And now it's my great honor to introduce a dear friend and our moderator for today's panel discussion, Tony Mason, the President and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League. Joining Tony today is a powerful, inspirational, and insightful panel and group of leaders who are making a big impact in our community every day. We know how busy they are, and we are grateful for their time today and looking forward to all of their comments. These are important issues going on in our country and our community, and again, we're grateful to have them with us today. So let's welcome Tony and our panelists who will share with today's session.
Good afternoon, Allison. Thank you so much for having me and our esteemed panelists have this discussion today with you and the members of the Economic Club of Indiana. We're all honored to be a part of this discussion today. It goes without saying, we are living through some unprecedented times. We're living through a pandemic. We're living through protests. And it's all forcing us to adjust and to adapt and to do more. And so we're just honored to be able to come to you today to talk about some of the different challenges facing our community. And we're going to be talking about everything from poverty, which in Indianapolis, 28% of Black families live in poverty. We're going to be talking about unemployment, which we know historically, when it comes to the Black community, if employment is 3% for the general population, it's usually 2 or 3 times higher for African Americans. We're going to talk about the fact that with the United Way's ALICE data, that's asset limited income employed families. We're going to talk about the fact that nearly 40% of all families living in Indianapolis and central Indiana are either poor or classified as working poor. We're going to talk about the fact that 70% of people in Indianapolis are in bad jobs, and that's defined as a combination of things ranging from low income to no prospects for promotion. We're going to talk about the fact that Black home ownership has declined since 2000 from nearly 50% to 31%. We're going to talk about the fact that social mobility, when it comes to Indianapolis, if you are born in Indianapolis poor, you are likely to die in Indianapolis poor. And so joining me today, I have some amazing panelists who are going to be participating in this discussion, and they all hold critical roles in our community. And so I'm going to introduce the group first, and then we're going to have each of them take a few minutes, if you will, to talk about some of the challenges that they see facing the community as well as opportunities. And so today we have with us Dr. Aleesia Johnson, Superintendent of Indianapolis Public Schools. We have John Thompson, who is a notable civic leader and business owner. He also serves on the Indiana Economic Development Corporation's board, and he's also a member of the Indiana Economic Recovery and Reopening Committee. We have Fred Payne, who is the commissioner of the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. We have Dr. Virginia Caine, who is the director of the Marion County Public Health Department. And then we have Moira Carlstedt, who is the president and CEO of the Indianapolis Neighborhood Partnership. And then we have Marshawn Wally, who is a local business owner. He also works at IUPUI on the faculty there, but he is also the advocacy chair of the African American Coalition of Indianapolis. And so we're going to jump right into this because we've got a lot of ground to cover. And we're so thankful for the 400 plus people who decided to join us today. With that, I'm going to quickly transition to Dr. Aleesia Johnson, Indianapolis Public Schools.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be with you this morning. Thanks for joining this conversation. And thank you for the invitation to be a part. So I'm going to start my comments sort of grounding us in some history, because I think you can hear the stats that Tony shared and think, wow, there is something that is just like inherently going wrong in the Black community. But what I would offer and say is, in fact, it has been a series of decisions that have happened across all the systems in our country that have led to the statistics that we see occurring now in our country. And so if you think back to 1868, when Black Americans were actually defined as citizens of the country, prior to that, we were not known as citizens, we were property. And then fast forward 100 years to 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, and Black Americans actually had the full access to their voting rights as citizens of this country. And so 100 years to go from being named a citizen, but to actually be able to take advantage of the rights as a citizen. And now we find ourselves, 100 years nearly later, still working and advocating for equitable access to the rights that we should be afforded as citizens in this country. And so if I narrow that a little bit and talk about Indianapolis, and I'll talk a little bit about Indianapolis Public Schools specifically, and the history of our district, which helps to find ourselves where we are today. And I'll start in the 1920s. IPS was founded before that, but in the 1920s, you had a school board who was essentially sponsored by the Ku Klux Klan, which was rampant across Indiana. And you had neighborhoods and business organizations, civic organizations, who looked at the number of African Americans who were in the city of Indianapolis and said, we want to ensure that we are separated and segregated from the African American community. The IPS school board was an active proponent of segregation. And Indianapolis was one of the last northern cities to actually advocate for school segregation, to the point that the Justice Department had to file a lawsuit against Indianapolis Public Schools because the loyalty to segregation was so deep and so significant that the government actually had to sue our district to force our hand in reckoning with desegregation. And once that desegregation happened, it was a one-way desegregation, meaning Black students in IPS were bused to our surrounding townships, but it was not the requirement of white students to have to come into IPS. And so again, you see the Black community having to carry the load and carry the weight of trying to get to a more equitable outcome. And the other thing I'll note is when that desegregation happened in IPS, what the judge determined as the tipping point of the percent of Black students who could go to the neighboring districts without white families fleeing was 15%. And that resonates with me. 15% was the number that was identified as what would be okay, that white families would tolerate in the surrounding neighborhoods and districts of Indianapolis. And that was in 1976. Many of us were alive at that time. And so we're not talking about inequities that have happened generations ago and lifetimes ago. We are talking about systems that took place within most of our lifetimes and that we are still feeling the impact of now. So that was a big reason why our board last week passed our racial equity policy to one, externally say and name the ways in which our school board has previously perpetuated inequities, and to name the fact that we will be intentional about disrupting those inequities and ensuring that we are serving our Black and Brown students well which means resource allocation, which means looking at the school buildings and what they are named and the people and the values that are represented with those names, which means thinking about the ways our children can access high quality curriculum that reflects their history and their identities, which means making decisions that support businesses who are led by Black and Brown folks, because we as a district are also a large employer, but also procurer of goods and services in our city. And so I'm proud to be a part of a team that has made that stake in the ground. I believe we're leading in this area, but I think it's important for you all who are on this call to understand that there is history that has gotten us to this moment, and that if we are not careful and intentional, we will continue to perpetuate inequities. We'll wrap it up and we'll call it something different, but it will continue to be perpetuated. I'll talk more about how that shows up in our state funding formula for schools. That's one way in which inequities are perpetuated, so we'll get to that. But want to make that point that we have to be intentional moving forward, or else we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aleesia. I know the Urban League, we partner proudly with IPS on educational initiatives as well as advocacy. And let it not be lost on everyone that's listening today. The equity around finances are really, really important. And so we're going to be needing everyone to advocate on behalf of IPS as well as our other local public school districts in order to address some of the challenges that they're all facing. We have too many children in our schools that need and deserve more resources, and as well as the teachers, if you will, and the administration in order to do a better job of educating our young people. Up next, I'd like to have Fred Payne, Commissioner of Indiana Department of Workforce Development, come forward to talk.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me here, Tony. I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about what our economic landscape is right now, and then actually talk about a few resources that will allow us to find our way out of this pandemic and sort of into a position where we can have better jobs in terms of being able to work remotely if a pandemic like this exists ever again. We hope that it doesn't. But what we found by and large is that individuals who have been hit hardest by this pandemic have been individuals who are not able to work remotely or who have those jobs that are more stationary. So I'll start off talking a little bit about our economic landscape. So as we all know, Indiana has been hit by the pandemic just as hard, if not harder, than any other state in the country. So coming into this year, our unemployment rate was about 3.2%. with an average number of weekly unemployment claims being filed right around about 3,500. Then in March, we saw a dramatic change in all of that. In a 1 week time period, we saw a number of unemployment claims jump to 140,000 in 1 week. And that's become kind of the new norm for the entire country. That 3.2% unemployment rate jumped to 16.9% in April. We saw a slight improvement last month when we moved from 16.9% unemployment to 12.3. I never thought I would, be at a time when I would say 12.3 was an improvement, but that 12.3 is still one of the largest that we've seen in Indiana history since 1982. So this is still significantly high. So during that first month, when the pandemic hit in March, Indiana lost about 381,000 jobs. About 116,000 of those jobs were in the leisure and hospitality and services industry. About 78,000 of those jobs were in manufacturing. Now, there was a slight rebound last month, as I mentioned, and we did gain back about 91,000 jobs during that time period. But that's still shy of the 381,000 that were lost. During that time, we've also seen the number of African Americans get hit harder from an unemployment standpoint. By percentage of population, African Americans filed for unemployment at a higher rate than any other ethnic group in Indiana. So what are some of the reasons that we found that led to this higher unemployment rate? Well, African Americans made up a greater portion of the jobs that were lost, leisure, hospitality, and services, as I mentioned, and even some in manufacturing. Many of those jobs, as you know, don't allow remote work. Those are jobs where you must be there to actually effectuate those jobs. So what underscores many of those jobs is education and skill level needed to have different types of jobs that would be what I would call recession-proof jobs, or jobs that allow for some type of flexibility of when this type of environment occurs. So this is the area that I think we have to focus a lot of our attention for people to become recession-proof, and that's in the educational attainment area. This is an issue across Indiana, period, but it does hit the African-American community a lot harder. So across the state, just for example, Indiana has attainment level in the low 40% range. If when I talk about attainment level, what I'm specifically talking about is our adult population. I'm talking about individuals who do not have any post-secondary credential when I talk about educational attainment. So that's the box that I'm talking about. So that educational attainment level in adults is about 42%. So only 42% of people in Indiana, adults, have certifications or some type of education beyond high school. Let's take a little closer look at some data. So high school graduates enrolling in college, 53% of Black students are enrolling in college, compared to 61% of all students of all races. Of college graduates, African Americans are about 16%. White Americans are 25%, Asian are 57%. Those individuals who are lacking a high school diploma, 10% white, 13% Asian, and 14% African American. The state's goal is to achieve a 60% attainment rate by 2025. And we've been working with national organizations and other states to achieve this goal. And achieving this goal is even more critical in the African American community because we see the impact during this pandemic. If this pandemic hasn't done anything, it has shined a light on these types of disparities. So what are some of the resources that are available that we're focusing on? So some of those resources are focused on really work, finding a job, exploring new careers, and getting some career advice. Secondly, education and training. What resources are out there to help complete the high school diploma, earn or finish a college degree, or get some short-term certification? There are a lot of high-value short-term certifications out there that allow individuals to have a really good financial quality of life. So some of the resources that we have available that we've expanded are what we call our Workforce Ready Grant. And our Workforce Ready Grant, it provides 100% tuition free for training and education for individuals who either find a job that they want to, or a job field that they want to go into, but they may not have the skills or education to go into it. We provide through our state 100% of that, the cost for that training. And here recently, with our rapid recovery efforts through some of the funding through the Federal CARES Act, we have doubled the amount of resources that are available in the area. So individuals can now have tuition-free access to tuition-free credentials and college credits. Those credits will go to one of the schools, Ivy Tech and/or Vincent University. And we've also expanded for employers what we call our Employer Training Grant Program. And this is to allow employers to invest in training their employees. The employers can get up to $100,000 to do that training. And this, I want to pause right here to really put an emphasis on the employer side of it as well. We have about 473,000 registered businesses in Indiana. We have only 1,700 registered women business enterprises, minority business enterprises, and veterans businesses in the state that are registered at the state level. There may be more that have a city-wide certification, but at a state level, that's the number we're looking at. So when we talk about making sure that employers have what they need, we want to make sure some of our MBs, WBs have those funding too. So we have direct some of our resources to really gain some awareness with those businesses as well.
Thank you, Fred. We really appreciate the information you shared with us today, and you actually created the perfect segue for us to transition to John Thompson so that he can talk about issues and challenges in the small and Black-owned business realm, if you will. John?
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me, and thank the 400 guests that are watching and viewing this presentation and this panel discussion. I just have a few minutes, which is not enough time to cover all that I would like to, so you can follow the rest in various op-eds that I might write throughout the rest of the summer. But I'll say for Black business in general, and that's for small, medium, and large, I'll give you a bit of a backdrop and then I'll move into it. You know, America right now and all of the advanced economies in the world, let's look at the G7 nations, if you will, we're suffering massive income inequality. Not race-based, just in general, massive income inequality, where the top 1% earn 27% of the income and hold 40% of the wealth, the top 1%. And it's growing at an extremely rapid pace. And there are a lot of reasons for it. Globalization, increase in inflation and asset values, but that's the backdrop. So what does that do? That creates more tension between groups in the middle class. So we see that tension playing out in the protests of Black Lives Matter, and they're protesting for justified reasons. And we see it playing out in the backlash from white supremacy groups who feel threatened because their income and their wealth is under pressure. And the 2008 recession was hard on lower income and middle income families, certainly on Black families, where 85% of the wealth of Black families was lost in that Great Recession. So others suffered a lot, but Blacks suffered much, much more. And throughout all of this, the police brutality, that lightning rod, it's persisted in your face. Apple, Samsung, you can see it on their phones and devices. And so, you know, it's come to a head. The young people are impatient and they're not going to wait. And so they've been a lightning rod for all of this. And, I certainly applaud them and their protests. Colin Kaepernick took a lot of grief for taking a knee, but I don't know that we'd be here without Colin taking that knee. I think that was a stance of protest, and it was civil protest, and it's got us here. And so where are we? Today, corporate America is speaking out against the injustice. We've heard from corporation after corporation, and I certainly take my hat off to what the corporations are saying. And now we're moving to a period where we're looking for corporate America to walk the talk. So what you've been saying, we're looking for the meat behind all the sizzle. Now, I will add, corporate America, you have many, many workers within your companies, and those workers, to a large extent, are in toxic environments. So what we're hearing from the very top of corporate America is not the experience that African Americans have in the workplace. In many cases, they're lonely. They're the only African-American that's the African-American person that's in the room. They're facing little insults and jibes. No, it's not in your face like my grandmother telling me at 5 years old, I had to drink from that dirty water fountain in the a Greyhound bus station. I couldn't drink from the shiny one. I didn't read that, I experienced that. So it's not in your face like that, but it's in your face talking about the hairstyle or the lips or some little subtle criticism that creates that environment. And so, you know, I encourage corporate leaders to make sure that throughout your organization, from top to bottom, you know, that they're getting and the tone at the top is permeating down through the organization, where they have the corporate culture that you would like them to have, or that you've been espousing as you've been speaking out and putting out the press. And I'm telling you, to a company, it's not there. And I can tell you, because I speak openly. I'm in a position where I can speak openly. I don't get concerned about backlash or any of that. And I'm telling you, your employees are suffering, and minority businesses are facing inequities within your company. If I look at the largest Black-owned businesses in this community, like a Mays Chemical or Harrison Ford Chemical or BC Forward, in their businesses here in central Indiana, their business is declining. And you may say, well, is their quality declining? Their business outside Indiana is growing rapidly. So the two chemical companies, Mays Chemical and Harrison Ford, their business is declining in favor of a German distributor, Brenntag. So Brenntag's business is growing while Mays and Harrison Ford is declining, but they're growing globally, both of them. They're growing globally. And Indiana, one of the best businesses that this state's produced is BC Forward. Not African-American businesses, businesses, period. Justin and Darianne Christian have built a business of 6,500 employees globally. If their business is declining within a corporation, that CEO need to parachute down into the company and find out why and fix the problem. And it may require a change in managers. I mean, there are reasons here to terminate people. Everyone can't be coached better when some things are just egregious. And you might say, well, you know, how did we get here? Well, Aleesia opened up talking about education, and the schools are very poor. And I've heard talk like, well, we've thrown so much money at it, throwing more money at it won't solve the problem. In God we trust, and everyone else bring data. I've looked at the data. You've not thrown money at schools in the inner city. You may have thrown money at education, but it's not at schools in the inner city. Otherwise, where is the facilities? I don't see the quality in the facilities. When I go inside, you know, yes, are the teachers paid and incentivized enough? And then lastly, when I go to an Arlington Woods Elementary and the students don't have iPads and computers, they do now, thanks to Eastern Star, they have them. And so, you know, that's been a problem. Well, what do we need to do? We need to grow businesses of scale. BC Forward is one, support them. But there are a number of other African-American owned businesses that we can grow. But it's all been watered down with words like diversity and inclusion that increasingly exclude African-Americans.
Yes.
And so a company will say, well, we met the XBE goal. Well, what is XBE? What about African American businesses and doing more with those businesses? And so, you know, employees are empowered to speak out today because the corporate leadership has spoken out against all types of injustices. And so their fear is diminished. But I will tell you this, and really, it is very accurate, that it is irrational for a white person to be afraid of a black person, because blacks have done nothing to whites in this country.
Yes.
But it is very rational for an African American to be afraid of whites, because they suffer all the time. Not
Yes,
just slavery, not just Tulsa, Oklahoma that the world's waking up to, but the mass incarceration today. You know, for welfare broke up the black family in the 60s and prevented black families from remarrying.
Yes.
I was
John,
one. Yeah.
So no, we definitely appreciate it. I mean, and I think for everyone that's participating, you do need to know that the city completed a landscape analysis with respect to Black and minority and women-owned businesses. And we look forward to hearing more from the city of Indianapolis about that. And we ask that you weigh in and pay attention as well, that you weigh in and pay attention to your hiring practices. And are you promoting African Americans within your corporation? We ask that you lean in and pay attention to your supplier diversity efforts, if you will, because we know that there are a lot of very good Black-owned businesses that could benefit from opportunities that many of you could make available. We know this to be the case. I know we will have time for questions, and so we will double back, and I know that Mr. Thompson will have a chance to share more as well. But we're going to quickly transition to Moira Carlstedt, President and CEO of the Indianapolis Neighborhood Housing Partnership, to give us some quick facts about home ownership decline and lack thereof with respect to financing and all of that good stuff.
Thank you, Tony. And I will respond to your question about facts. I'm going to talk about 5 topics, all data-driven, that should give you a foundation for the affordable housing challenges facing Marion County today. And with active intervention, as has been mentioned earlier, the landscape could be improved and changed. First is affordable housing. Now, some of you may know these definitions, and I apologize for that. Please be patient for a moment. But affordable housing has many different definitions, but the fact is affordable housing is when the cost of housing, rental or home ownership, is less than 30% of your annual gross income. So affordable is when you're not paying more than 30% for your housing. In terms of income, certainly income in the affordable housing industry, the income, the percentage of the area median income is determined annually by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. In 2019, 100% of the area median income as determined by HUD for a family of 3 was $71,900. If someone says they're earning or supporting a program for people earning 30% or less of the area median income, that family is earning $21,750. If they say they're supporting families at 80%, that family is earning $57,520. So income in the affordable housing arena is a percentage of the area median income as defined by HUD. Third item, housing cost burden. This is not a well-known term, but I have a feeling it will be very well known and understood in a short period of time. Affordable housing cost burden is when the cost of housing, rental or home ownership exceeds 30% of the annual gross income. So it's affordable if it's less than 30%, it's a housing cost burden if it's more than 30%. In Marion County, when you combine housing cost burden and area median income of less than 80%, in Marion County, we have over 115,000 households who have that combined challenge, 115,000 plus. That's about 31% of the households, housing cost burden, and considered low and moderate income. 69% of those are renters and 31% are homeowners. Two other topics, evictions and foreclosures, certainly on the front pages, and we're grateful for the moratorium, which is not a long-term solution, obviously. INHP commissioned a study at the request of the community to try to get a handle on the size of this challenge. In the area of foreclosures, absent COVID, we would have expected in the neighborhood of 1,300 households at risk. Because of COVID, the disruption in income, we're expecting upwards of 20,000 foreclosures in Marion County. In the area of evictions, absent COVID, on average, not average, substantial risk going to be 9,500. Because of COVID, we're estimating substantial risk of nearly 30,000 households in Marion County. 30,000. Now the city is has created a rental assistance program and certainly will help, but there's a lot more to be done in this area of eviction. We cannot have all these families being evicted from their homes. The fifth item of specific data is the disparity between the Black and white home ownership rates. In 2007, the white home ownership rate was 68.9%. In the 10 years since that time, the white home ownership rate has been reduced by 3.7%. In 2007, the Black home ownership rate was 46%. And in that same 10 years, they've lost 15% of their home ownership position. Needless to say, housing, rental, and home ownership has a great many challenges, and we're honored to be part of the conversations and the solution. Thank you, Tony, for inviting us.
Thank you, Moira. We truly appreciate your leadership and the work that INHP is doing to address some of the housing disparities and issues that we see facing our city. Up next, I've got Dr. Virginia Caine, Director of the Marion County Public Health Department. Unmute, Dr. Caine, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about health disparities. So when we look across the country, we know we have a higher burden of cardiovascular disease, poor outcomes for breast cancer, higher amputation rates for peripheral vascular disease or diabetics, lower kidney transplant rates, and even worse rates for maternal and infant mortality that we can park on the healthcare disparity. But when we saw this COVID-19 epidemic, it really highlighted the issues related to the impact on our African Americans. In Chicago, more than 50% of their COVID-19 cases were African Americans, and yet they only made up 30% of the population, but 70% of their deaths were African Americans. In the state of Louisiana, 70.5% of their deaths occurred in Black persons, but they only represented 32% of the state population. And even here in Indianapolis, almost 45% of our cases were in African Americans, and our death rate was twice the rate of our white counterparts. Now, how has our chronic medical conditions amplified this issue? Well, you looked at COVID-19, and let's just like heart disease, the #1 killer of everybody, but especially African Americans. So we have a genetic makeup that makes us at higher risk for hypertension. We're more sensitive to salt. So even in your younger ages, we're having African American males in their 20s, females, having hypertension. So that's more of a genetic standpoint. But when we look at the social determinants from an economic standpoint, we may find that we have a higher population of Blacks living in high housing density, high crime rates, but poor access to healthy foods. And so now you say the #1 effective strategy for COVID-19 is social distancing. Well, wow, how do you do that when you have a higher population, housing density, number of families living in the same household. How do you do the social distancing? 2, if African Americans are in 8 of the 10 lowest paying jobs, we can't telecommute. We have to be out there on the front lines, putting us up at a much higher risk. And then we wonder, having limited access to healthy foods, but also just even from a primary care standpoint, may have limited access to health care, or even as issues have been brought up initially, having access to COVID-19 testing. So what's our action plan from this? I hope that when we've addressed this COVID-19 and it's over, that people don't forget what were the basic underlying challenges for us. That if we don't address this, we're always going to be vulnerable for even greater complications. And I'm very frightened that if we don't address this quickly, the upcoming fall is going to be a double whammy with influenza as well as COVID-19. And we now have that COVID-19 strain that's even mutating as we speak. That maybe as many as 70% of the COVID-19 strains now are way more contagious than the strain we started out with. And so lots of questions, but the main theme, because public health is complicated and social reengineering is complex, we have got to trigger fully addressing healthcare disparities, because we're just going to continue to see huge cases of morbidity and mortality in our people of color, African Americans, Latinx populations, and I will stop and go on here.
Thank you, Dr. Caine. Dr. Caine has been doing some incredible work all over our community in addressing everything from COVID to the homeless, and Dr. Caine, you ought to be commended for that work. Up next, we've got Marshawn Wally, and he's going to talk about the African American Coalition.
I'm going to truncate my comments just so that we can get to the questions. I always start these presentations out by explaining that I am not okay. I am witnessing the systematic racism killing Black people, but I remain hopeful, and I'm going to explain why. The African American Coalition of Indianapolis is a nonpartisan collaboration of African American civic, social, professional service, and community organizations with the goal to engage and educate African Americans on the local, state, and national political process. For some time, the African American Coalition has been looking at this concept called Black Indianapolis. Black Indianapolis is roughly, based on available data, around 248,000 people. For additional context, Fort Wayne is around 270,000 people. So when you think of Black Indianapolis, it might be the 3rd largest city in the state. Twice in the last 4 years, over 100 Black males have been killed in the city. Twice in the last 4 years, over 100 Black males have been killed in this city. We've now reached over 100 homicides sooner than any time in the city's history. When you consider that there's a $22,000 gap between white and Black median income, when you consider the home ownership rate is around 31% and the dramatic decline, and then you look on the other side of a 69% rental rate, where the vast majority of the individuals that are renting are rent burden. That is, they are paying more than 30% of their income on rent. When you also consider the fact that we are second only to New York in the number of evictions, you begin to understand, or even food deserts. Most of the Black communities are in food deserts. You begin to understand some of the systems that are conspiring to kill Black people in this city. And so the Black community has not decided to lay down and die. The African American Coalition has developed an agenda. As a part of our agenda process, we also have commissioned a survey that is seeking feedback and input on not only the current agenda that is operational, but the next version of our plan. In addition to that, we've also launched the African American Legacy Fund of Indianapolis, which has raised over $300,000 to address some of the systemic issues that we are facing. I said I remain hopeful. In the Black National Anthem, there's a phrase that says, "Hope unborn has died." Hope unborn has died is probably the bleakest situation you could possibly be in. Nevertheless, we sing it. We sing it in our national anthem, and I think the elders remind us of that, to do that because we've been in bleak situations before. And so that is why I've decided to remain hopeful, even though I'm not okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshawn. To everyone that is a part of this meeting today, the attendees, just know that when you think about the protests that we've seen happening, not only here, but all over the country, they're not just about police reform and accountability, which is very, very important. It's also about everything from poverty to high unemployment, jobs with low wages, under-resourced schools, lack of affordable housing, lack of access to food, lack of access to affordable health care, lack of opportunities for Black-owned businesses. Each of you has the opportunity to play a part in helping to create solutions and to address some of these challenges. And so now more than ever, we need each of you, if you're business owners, your organization owners, your civic leaders, to lean in, and to lean in not just to listen, but to move towards action. You know, as I shared earlier, 28% of the Black community in Indianapolis lives in poverty. You heard Marshawn say there were 230,000, 240,000 Blacks in Indianapolis. Imagine that, almost a third in poverty. And a lot of these issues mirror the same challenges that working class and poor whites face as well. And so we need everybody to lean in and to own it right now. And with that, yes, we are ready to open the chat up for questions, if you will. And as we wait for questions, do any of our panelists, do any of you have any additional comments to add at this point? Dr.
Yes.
Caine?
Yes. So I think what does us the service in our community, across the community, we talk about unemployment, but it's a false number because it only just says whether you're employed or not. It doesn't say nothing that, hey, I'm employed, but I'm making $7.25 an hour. So the rest of the business community and this entire community think, oh, we got a lower unemployment rate. We're doing fantastic. We don't measure unemployment based on if you're making a living wage. So we're given a false sense of data that really has no meaning for us because it doesn't give the true unemployment based on, do you have a job where you're making at least a living wage? So Urban League or Chamber of Commerce, we need to produce annual reports of unemployment based on whether you're making a living wage or not.
Yes.
That would
Yes.
be the only way to tell you our true status of how our people are faring, breaking down by race and other categories.
Absolutely, and we're going to do this real quickly with the questions. Aleesia, there's a question regarding the government suing IPS.
Yeah, that was in 1964.
Okay. Also, we have a question for Dr. Caine regarding, are we testing for COVID at the right level?
So we're currently testing at 1,500. That's the minimum amount that we're doing, but we are hoping to really increase the number of tests we're doing in our community. We're trying to negotiate now with the city of Indianapolis to provide us some funding, more funding in order to increase our numbers of testing. So, but we're averaging at least 1,500 people a day, but we really want to increase that substantially. And we are going to be identifying 2 new sites, I think at the end of this week, that's going to be operational next week. But we're hoping to we're in negotiations now with our federally community qualified centers to also provide additional testing with those centers. You know, some of them have at least 15 community health centers across Marion County. We currently right now have about 21 operational testing sites going on currently,
Yes.
but we feel we can definitely do more.
Yes. You know, several questions have been posed about wages, and I will say this. 2 years ago, the Brookings Institute told us that not only should minimum wage be at least $15 an hour, it actually should be as high as $23 per hour if we're really trying to help families to move from poverty, if you will, to prosperity and to avoid the benefits. Education regarding strategies, if you will, what can we do to make public education equitable? Aleesia?
So I think in the same way that we can name all of the racist practices that have led to inequities, we have to be comfortable and okay saying we are actually going to disproportionately fund and support to make education more equitable. So I appreciated John's statement around folks saying we've thrown money at it. I keep hearing that, but the reality of the fact is, no, we haven't, not at the level at which all systems conspire to create inequities. We have to have that same level of energy, dedication, and engagement to the undoing and the course correction of centuries and decades in our city of perpetuating inequities. And so, for example, all of us can advocate to our legislators. Our legislators have said, hey, districts who are more impoverished, you've not been able to provide for us how you're using those dollars. So we're going to move away from differentiating funding, and we're going to move to equal funding. So even in this last budget session, Zionsville Schools, that has very low poverty and is overwhelmingly white, the percent increase of their funding was twice that of IPS. Dollar for dollar, are we still funded higher dollar for dollar? Sure, but if I'm looking at the level of poverty that our families experience and the level of need that exists, I simply cannot see the justification for why a district who is very well resourced, who within its own community because of property values and employment, does not face the same challenges as IPS. And so all of us can call our legislators and say, there has to be an intentional strategic funding to undo the inequity. Saying it's going to just stay the same is actually not going to be enough. And to be frank, we've not gone back to our funding even before the Great Recession. We've still not, across the education sector, gotten back to pre-2008 funding. And the reality of the fact is we need to be far above that. So give us the money and let us try to do the work and then tell us you've thrown enough there. But let's do that first before that becomes the default answer.
Absolutely. Moira, there's a question regarding what is the answer to the affordable housing issue?
The answer, I can give you some clues as to the answer and some strategies that INHP in partnership with the community are extending. But affordable housing is a function of supply, demand, and financing. So we need to preserve quality affordable housing that we have. We need to establish mechanisms and financing structures that enable us to increase the supply of affordable housing, recognizing there's no one source that can finance what it's going to take to get to the supply. Additionally, we need the ability for people of low and moderate income and particularly underserved populations, the Black population and people of color, to access the information they need to understand what their choices are, how to prepare to become homeowners, and how to recognize a quality housing stock with a mortgage product or financing product that meets their ability long term. So it's a supply and demand, education, access, choice, partnerships, and leveraging the human and financial capital that does exist here and at a federal and state level, that when properly assembled with the motivations that we all share, the potential for increasing and sustaining affordable housing, that's the only way it will ever, I think, in my opinion, be successful.
Thank you, Moira. John, there's a question about what white-owned businesses can do to engage in the issues and to provide support to the Black community.
Well, several things can be done. One, you know, I recommend a bifurcated strategy of one, helping to encourage the formation of new companies. So Indiana needs more new business formation, period, and certainly in the African-American community. And then secondly, to really support and grow businesses of scale. And so there are several African-American businesses that are poised for major substantial growth. And I think companies can work with those businesses to do that. Those larger companies have capital, they have a management team, and they're ready to grow. They need to be given an opportunity. And there's a lot of help for starting smaller businesses, and I'd be happy to go through some of that with someone at another time.
Thank you, John. And I know there was another question about what corporate partners can do right away to impact change. As you heard me share earlier, it's look at your hiring practices. Hire more African Americans. Pay them a livable wage. Pay them what they are worth. Look at your supplier diversity pipelines. You should be doing business with Black-owned businesses. And then also, I would encourage as many of you as possible in influential positions to lean in like what we've seen recently from Anthem with its $50 million commitment to address racial injustice. Lean in like Eli Lilly and Co. with their $25 million commitment on their day of solidarity to address racial injustice. Now more than ever, this is not just about listening. It's everything from hiring to also providing substantial resources, as Aleesia has shared, to address the challenges that are facing everything from education to health, to housing, to business development, to hiring and wages. And so again, we just appreciate having the opportunity today for everyone to participate in this discussion. And I know I want to thank Allison and the leadership of the Economic Club for allowing me to be a part of this, and all of our esteemed panelists to participate in this discussion. Allison?
Thank you, Tony, and thank you so much to everyone on the panel today. Education on these topics is critical as we all work towards solution together. And I want to thank each of you for all the facts that you provided on these critical topics. And these conversations have to continue to move forward so we can find solutions and keep the conversations going. And you can share this recording with today's discussion. It's going to be available on economicclubofindiana.com, so you can review it and then also share it. Thank you again to everyone. Please join us next week on Tuesday, July 7th for a panel discussion with some of the country's leaders in higher education, including Mitch Daniels, James Danko, and Patrick Mullane, who will share how these institutions are adapting in a new COVID world. So make sure to register for that again. Tony, thank you for hosting today. We appreciate you and all the work that you're doing. And each of the panelists, thank you again. Your passion and your inspiration in this community is remarkable. We appreciate your time with us today. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Now. Bye-bye.